All right, folks, I am going to get us started for this evening. As you likely know, my name is Ariel Cates. I'm the Director of Programming. So glad that you're all here. Um, I mean, Andrew is going to tell you a lot of things about village preservation, but I can say that we have been documenting, celebrating, and fighting for the preservation of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo since 1980, which is 40 years ago. So we work to expand and extend landmark and zoning protections and stop inappropriate development while also encouraging appropriate development in our neighborhoods. We host roughly 75 programs a year, including 3 this week, all of which are now virtual and most of which are free and open to the public. Our events are meant to illuminate the cultural and architectural heritage, history, and depth, and the value of preservation in our communities. Your support and involvement mean the world to us at Village Preservation, and Andrew will tell you much, much more. So at any point during Andrew's talk, please put questions into the Q&A. We would love to get to chat about all of your questions once Andrew is done with his talk. And I will be here in the chat, so feel free to say hello. So I will introduce Andrew. Andrew Berman has been the Executive Director of Village Preservation since 2002. He previously worked in state and city government, where he focused on issues including land use and historic preservation. In 2013, he was named to the Vanity Fair Hall of Fame for his preservation work at Village Preservation and was named one of the 100 most powerful people in real estate by the New York Observer. A lifelong New Yorker, Andrew has an art history degree from Wesleyan University. So Andrew, take us away.
Thank you very much, Ariel, and thank you for all your great work on our programs, which I'm thrilled to be a part of tonight. And as Ariel said, tonight's program is about 40 years of village preservation, and 18 or so of which I've been a part of. And in contemplating tonight's program, I really thought, in an hour program, how do you sum up 40 years of an organization? And there really is no way of doing that. So instead, what I'm going to do is take you on a sort of subjective tour of some of our many wonderful accomplishments, things that I'm particularly proud of, some of which I was involved with, some of which I had nothing to do with, but I'm nevertheless particularly fond of, or think speak very well for the organization and what it's done, and talk a little bit about its roots and its evolution and where it's come from and where it's going to, some of which many of you have been a part of, some of which may be new to you, and encourage you to explore further and find out more about some of these things that we talk about tonight and give you a means for doing that. So I am going to share my screen in order to allow that to happen, and hopefully I can do that. Hold on a second. This is right. Yes, this is correct. So hopefully you are now seeing something that says 40 years of village preservation. Ariel will tell me if that's not the case.
It says that you've started screen sharing, but it is not showing anything. So sometimes it takes a minute.
Okay. It says sharing is being paused. Bring the shared window to the front. Now I'm going to press resume share and see if that helps any.
Nope.
Okay. Let me try. Should I press stop share and then start?
Yeah, try doing it again.
Okay. All right. And then do share screen. Share. It says you are screen sharing.
There we go.
Working?
Yes.
Great. All right, cool. Thank you. So, part of what sparked this also is that we recently released this wonderful story map, 40 years of village preservation. And by the way, everything we're going to look at tonight is from our website. So you really just need to go to our website and take a look and it'll all be there. We're going to come back to this new map that we launched. But as you can see, it takes you through 40 years of village preservation year by year. And if you're particularly fond of one decade of village preservation, you can jump around by decade. It's got a lot of information in it, so sometimes it takes a minute or two to load, but you can go by decade and take a look at some of our great accomplishments during that era, as well as year by year. And I'm going to come back to this towards the end of the evening. But it's a really, really great way of looking at kind of where we started and where we went, where we ended up. But I would like to take you through, as I said, some of my favorites. So in terms of what the organization has done and accomplished. So first of all, as I think everybody knows, advocacy around preservation work is an enormous part of what we do, and certainly among my favorite things that the organization gets to do. In the 40 years of the organization's existence, we have helped to get over 1,250 buildings landmarked. That includes dozens of individual landmarks and 11 historic or landmark districts or district extensions, stretching from the Hudson River to the East River, from 14th Street to south of Houston Street, covering every kind of building. And this map that we have on our website, which is very complicated, shows some of that. And you can take a look at this. But as you'll see from here, there are a whole range of historic districts we helped to get designated, from the East Village Lower East Side Historic District in 2012 that really expanded tenfold the amount of landmark protections or historic district protections in the East Village, to the South Village, the 3 different South Village historic districts that we got designated, the Gansevoort Market Historic District. We also got zoning protections for almost 100 blocks of our neighborhood. That's a really important part of what we do and how we protect our neighborhood, because zoning says what can and can't be built, how big it can be, what kind of uses it can have, things of that nature. We also got zoning protections for the entire Hudson River waterfront to protect it from the Hudson River Park air rights, which in 2013 the state allowed to be transferred, which meant that all of this sort of empty space floating over parts of the Hudson River Park could be moved inland and turned into buildings, basically 1.5 million square feet of them, which we thought was a terrible idea. And now Greenwich Village has protections from them being used here, as well as a lot of individual landmarks, which you can see here, some of which were at the time threatened with demolition. We also managed to affect the outcome in a lot of cases of planned or proposed developments, everything from a 500-foot tall tower in the meatpacking district that we stopped to a 400-foot tall tower that NYU wants to build on Bleecker Street, and a lot more. So we're going to talk more about that as we go through, but that's certainly a big part of what we do. And part of what I'm especially proud of in terms of the preservation work that GVSHP, now Village Preservation, has done, old habits die hard, in terms of landmark designations, is not only that we've gotten so much of our neighborhood landmarked and its great history, but that we've really expanded the scope of what kinds of things have been considered worthy of landmark designation and why. And that's both in terms of types of architecture and in terms of types of history. So traditionally, landmark designation really focused almost exclusively on architecture and almost exclusively on sort of high style architecture by prominent architects or in sort of very established or very old architectural styles. We thought it was very important for the city to consider landmark designation, not just of buildings for the famous, the rich and famous, but in fact buildings for immigrant New Yorkers, working class New Yorkers, especially during the great period of immigration from the late 19th into the early 20th century, which is a lot of what we see in our neighborhood. And we also thought it was important that landmark designation look at not just the style of buildings, but the history of what took place there, especially in relation to countercultural history, civil rights history, and even the history of affordable housing in our neighborhoods. So as you can see from this report we issued a few years ago, we were able to get some of the first historic districts designated in New York that honor immigrant history. Those 3 South Village historic districts that I mentioned are those, along with the East Village Lower East Side Historic District, and you can see a little bit about that here. Our neighborhoods, of course, also have a really, really rich history and connection to the LGBT civil rights movement and community. We were able to get Stonewall designated as the first landmark in New York City based on LGBT history. And then in successive years, we were able to get some other LGBT landmarks designated, which I'll get to shortly. But our South Village Historic District also focused on countercultural history. So it wasn't just that the buildings were so beautiful, but that things like the Gaslight Cafe or Cafe Wa or Minetta Tavern, where all of these incredibly important writers and thinkers and performers gravitated, were located there. And then, of course, we also have focused a lot on preserving landmarks of the affordable housing movement and changes in our city around affordable housing. So Westbeth, as you can see here, along with Silver Towers, were 2 complexes that we were able to get landmarked. And we've certainly made documenting African-American history and fighting for the protection of sites connected to both African-American history and specifically the African-American civil rights movement a big part of what we do. This report we issued in 2017, and in the years since then, we've had even more success. In 2019, as you can see here from our old website, we were able to get several more sites connected to the LGBT civil rights movement landmarked. The LGBT Community Center on 13th Street, the Gay Activist Alliance Firehouse on Worcester Street, and a whole bunch of other sites located throughout our neighborhoods. Part of the landmark designation was related to their connection to LGBT history. So what we just looked at, by the way, was one of many reports that Village Preservation has issued over the years, and I'd urge you to check them out. They're on our website. They're everything from exposés of the city's faulty process in terms of awarding the 14th Street Tech Hub project that we were so opposed to and are continue to be opposed to ones that illuminate the history of various parts of our neighborhood. Here's one example. This was a report by Francis Maroney about the history of the East Village and its architecture. It's about 200 something pages long, and it's a really, really rich history of that neighborhood. And there's a few others that I wanna show you from here that I think would be particularly interesting to you. Here's one. So this one is about looking at 20 years of getting federal era houses landmarked in our neighborhoods. Federal era houses are typically the oldest buildings in our neighborhoods. They're houses that were built between the 1790s and the 1830s, and they're found throughout our neighborhoods. We've been able to get about 136 of them, either landmarked or placed on the State National Register of Historic Places, or both. And several of them, as you can see from this map here, were done as individual designations. Some of these I'm sure are familiar to you, the Hamilton Holly House on St. Mark's Place, but a lot of them were from historic districts that we helped get designated throughout our neighborhoods. They're just found within these historic districts. And that's just as an important way of protecting them. So that's definitely been a big part of what we do. So let me move back here. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. Another aspect of what Village Preservation has done over the years that I think is particularly wonderful is our Village Awards, which happens every year, even this year during COVID in early June, along with our annual meeting. It's been going on for almost 30 years now. You can go back to our on our website and you can see videos and pictures of all of the awardees, but it's really a great chance to sort of give back to some of the wonderful people, institutions, places, community leaders who contribute so marvelously to our neighborhood. So this is 2019. You can go to the website, watch the video, see some pictures, but also just find out a little bit more about some of these really, really great entities and groups, whether it's the Christopher Park Alliance, you know, a nonprofit that helps to maintain a really important green space in our neighborhood, a wonderful, longstanding, independently owned local business, a local arts or cultural institution, another wonderful, longstanding business, a performance space, a teacher and poet and writer, an estate, in this case, the estate of Fred W. McNamara, which has been so incredibly helpful and generous, not just to us, but to many other nonprofits out there in terms of using the legacy of Fred McNamara's photographs to help support really, really important causes. So if you've ever been to any one of our annual meetings and Village Awards, you know there's rarely a dry eye in the house. It's really a wonderful opportunity to shed some light on some great people and great stories. And we've been doing that for a couple of decades now, not quite since the organization was founded, but since the 1990s. Let's see, we looked at that already, and that's that. So let's talk about our historic image archive, which now, as you can see from here, I apologize, has over 2,300 images in it. Historic images, mostly of our neighborhoods, Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo, as well as parts of the Lower East Side, but actually with some that stretch from all across the city. And you can check them out. We have a couple of dozen collections, various themed collections, whether it's by who donated them to us or what they are of. Who donated them tends to give you a little bit of insight into what they're about. The Center for Migration Studies, these images are almost all late 19th and early 20th century of Italian immigrants in our neighborhood. Here, the Meredith Jacobson Marciano collection is an East Village location scout, basically who donated her personal photographs from the 1970s through 9/11 that just show a wonderfully incisive view, but a very subjective perspective on the city. The estate of Fred McNamara donated these photographs of us to Willem de Kooning at 831 Broadway, which is a building that we saved from demolition, and that was part of the effort. The Fritsch family, which lived next door to the High Line in the West Village in 1962, took some wonderful pictures of it being dismantled at the time. Some of them come from our own archives of images we took of buildings in the neighborhood that we were documenting and doing research on. So things like the Meatpacking District in Far West Village, the Tunnel Garage, a building which we sadly unsuccessfully fought to try to save from demolition, some wonderful old postcards. Anyway, we could do more than an entire program just on this. But the fact that we've in the last several years been able to digitize all these images and share them with the public and build up our collection so much in the last 2 decades is really amazing. We first, as I said, some of these images go back to the earliest days of the organization in the 1980s when we were taking pictures, and then when people started donating to us, but it's really multiplied and expanded greatly in the last few years. So that's something that I'm very proud of. Then we have our Greenwich Village Historic District map and tours, which we produced last year as part of the 50th anniversary of the Greenwich Village Historic District. A lot of people confused it with our 50th anniversary. That will be in 2030. So we're getting there, but don't call us 50 just yet. We've only just turned 40. But the Historic District is, in fact, past its 50th birthday. And to mark that occasion, we put together this set of maps, this map with images and tours, which shows everything from every building in the district in 1969 and today. So you can see side by side how the buildings looked, in this case, divided up geographically. And then we have a whole series of tours of the neighborhood based on various themes. So this one is immigration landmarks, the monument to Giuseppe Garibaldi, the New School for Social Research, which was also referred to as the University in Exile, when all of these refugees from the Nazis basically fled to the New School. The White Horse Tavern, with its great connection to Irish immigrant history. The Second Cemetery of the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue, which is actually not only New York's first synagogue, but the first synagogue established in all of North America. Their second cemetery, of course, is located in our neighborhood. We have other ones like Where the Course of History Changed in Our Neighborhoods, Transformative Women, Where They Lived. Let's see, what are some other nice ones here? Little Flatirons that are located in the neighborhood. African-American history, significant people, institutions connected to African-American history in our neighborhood, etc. So being able to bring the Greenwich Village Historic District to life, which was such a basis for the original formation of the organization in 1980, is great, even though we've expanded our mission and our boundaries considerably since then. So speaking of expanding our mission and boundaries, let's look at our Greenwich, Civil Rights and Social Justice Map, which we launched also in 2017. In late 2016, early 2017, we started to think even more intently about issues around civil rights and social justice. And we had before that, but it really became particularly prominent in our mind around that time for some reason. And it's continued to be and will continue to be. And so this map, which as you can see has over 120,000 views from people around the world, shows landmarks in our neighborhood connected to African-American history, of which there are many. LGBT history, also a lot to look at here. And I'll just, let me click on one just to kind of give you a sense of how that looks. So, you know, we have an image here, and they'll typically be, so the Oscar Wilde bookstore was the first LGBT bookstore in the world. Have some information about it, links to further information that can be found on our website. Just to give you an example, women's history, certainly a lot of that in our neighborhood. Not too many people know Amelia Earhart was a former resident of Greenwich Village. Lots of great stuff here. Other social justice and civil rights landmarks, some wonderful sites, fewer, but still very important, connected to Hispanic and Latino history, and Asian American history as well. So we're constantly adding to this map. So even if you've looked at it before, check it out again. You might see some new things on there. And I have no doubt that even if you have looked at it, you probably haven't seen everything that there is to be seen on there. So that's an accomplishment that the organization, I think, is particularly proud of. As we are of our East Village Building Blocks website, which we released about a year and a half ago, which took us about a dozen years literally to create, and it is a record of the history of every single building in the East Village, which we researched, going back to primary source materials along with a series of tours. So basically what you can do is you can click on a block. It will then bring up the block. It will bring up all the pictures. We really don't need to look up the history of that one. So let's say this building here, bring it up, date of construction, who designed it, who owned it, its history, some pictures, more pictures, oftentimes historic photos, as well as just photos showing different details of the building, links to various things that we've written about the building. So it's really, really a great way to get to know the neighborhood. And then as you can see, we have a series of tours of the East Village on a variety of themes. Take a look here at churches. The East Village has a sort of really wonderful cornucopia of churches reflecting the kaleidoscopic ethnic history of the neighborhood, which changed over time. So a church might have been built for German Baptists, and then it became Ukrainian Catholic. It might have then become a synagogue. It might have later become a mosque. These churches are sort of shapeshifters in terms of who they serve, but the buildings themselves often stay beautifully intact. And that's a real tribute to the history and preservation of the neighborhood. So this will bring you along a great tour of the neighborhood. And then just this year, we released our 19th Amendment Centennial Story Map to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the amendment to the Constitution, which eliminated sex-based discrimination in voting rights. And unsurprisingly, there are a ton of sites in our neighborhood that are significant and connected to the history of suffrage. And we highlight some of those stories. We take you to the places where the people lived, what they did, their impact on the movement, as well as some other things about who they were and what they did. And some of these stories are well known. Some are ones that we ourselves dug up from our research. They're all really compelling. So I would certainly recommend checking it out if you haven't already or you get a chance. So moving on from there. So actually, you know what, I'd just like to kind of show off how this looks when you first open it up. This is our new South of Union Square map and tours, sometimes referred to as Virtual Village. And not unlike the East Village building blocks, but in a very different format. It's the history of every one of the 200 buildings in this area, south of Union Square, where Greenwich Village and the East Village meet, that are largely unprotected in terms of landmark designation, endangered as a result, and that we are currently seeking to get landmark designation for them. Here as well, we've got a series of themed tours, and there is a remarkably rich history here. African-American, architecture, artists, booksellers, the Civil War. There's tours that are Grove Press, which really revolutionized literature and overturned a lot of restrictions in terms of censorship in the 20th century, was very much located here. Jewish history, LGBTQ history. We've got the Roosevelts, who had a significant presence in the neighborhood, a lot of very significant publishers. So it's really the Stuyvesants. So it's really a wonderful resource and lots of great stuff to explore. And I'm just going to briefly show you, we do writers and authors. So if you click on it, you'll see, might take a second or two, a bunch of sites that will appear. This first one I happen to know was the residence of Frank O'Hara, and there'll be some information about Frank O'Hara. There he is in there. You can jump from site to site if you like. This one, if I'm not mistaken, was just recently added to the Writers and Authors Tour because we discovered that Bret Easton Ellis, yep, there he is, wrote American Psycho while living there. So there's some really interesting history. And then separate and apart from that, you can also just click on any building. So I'm just going to randomly pick one, 813 Broadway. So you'll see some images of the building, and you will see which tours it's featured in so that you can get more information. You click here and you'll get sort of a rough summary of the building and its history, but not all the details. You have to go on the tour to get all the details. But this building, which was built around 1850, it was home to the whole of the Loyal National League, of which James A. Roosevelt was the secretary. There was also a very important photographer in the 1800s who was located here. Explore those tours and you'll find out more. So that's something new that we've introduced that we're very proud of. Something that's both old and new is our oral history collection, which we've been doing since the 1990s. Jane Jacobs was one of the first people who we interviewed for our oral history collection because it was originally focused on the great preservationists who at this point in the 1990s were getting up there in age, and we wanted to make sure we captured their recollections on tape, and you can listen to them and in writing while we still could. And we're, of course, incredibly grateful that we did. In fact, our oral history with Jane Jacobs was recently used in the movie that was made about her, Citizen Jane. And so in addition to all these other wonderful people connected to the early preservation movement. Here you have Claire Tankl. She's the widow of Stanley Tankl, who is sitting here in this car here, the last car to drive through Washington Square, very involved with the struggle to get automobile traffic out of Washington Square. We have them divided up by various subject matters. So if we take a look at immigration, you'll see a lot of these folks who are in here. In the case of Paula is an artist. Robert runs the La Nacional, which is the sort of piece that's left over of what used to be this very, very large Spanish immigrant community in the West Village and Chelsea. Val Orselli, who's a leading housing activist in the neighborhood. Peter Ruda, who fled the Holocaust, a great painter who died just a few years ago. Andrew and Romana Raffetto. Romana also passed away just a couple of years ago, but the owners of Raffetto Pasta. So really some wonderful, wonderful stories here. We've got about 60 of them in all. And as I said, we've been gathering them for about 25 years now. So a little more than halfway through our existence. So definitely a piece of what we do that I'm particularly proud of. And then I'm going to take you to the blog, which we are actually coming up very soon on our 10th anniversary of the establishment. So sort of the most recent quarter of village preservation. It's added to basically every workday, and it's just a wonderful array of histories and information and stories connected to our neighborhood. This one here was about the African Free School. This one highlights one of these recent tours about the New York Public Library and its formation, and it's connected to the area south of Union Square. Revolutionaries on East 2nd Street, the Star House, an East Village story from German church to synagogue to landmark. This is a great example of, as I said, one of these sort of shape-shifting houses of worship and the many different forms it went through. So there's about 3,000 entries in our blog now, collected over 10 years, and new ones added, as I said, virtually every day. So check it out. For a little over 10 years now, we have been doing something which no other entity in New York City was doing when we began doing this. Now, several of them do, which is basically that whenever there is an application for a change to a landmark structure in our neighborhood that has to go through the public hearing and review process, we put it up on our website and we provide the public with all of the information about when the hearings are, how you can attend, how you can send in testimony, as well as the application itself, so you know what it is that's being proposed. And we've created a system by which you can sign up in order to be notified about these and click on any one of these items to find out more. Here, I'll just sort of click on this one that's coming up to give you an example. It's an individual landmark. It's actually buildings we helped get landmarked. Here's a description of it. When we first started doing this over 10 years ago, as I said, nobody was doing this, not even the Landmarks Preservation Commission, whose job really it is. Now they do provide some more information online, but not in nearly as user-friendly a form and not as full as we do. And ours is designed to allow you to and encourage you to participate in the system, so that when there's something coming up that you feel strongly about, whether you think it's a good idea, a bad idea, you think it would be okay if something about it was changed, you have a way of knowing about it and having your voice being heard. We, of course, do that, but we wanted the public to be able to do it as well. So it's something that we provide, and you can search by map. This is the map version of it. And you can also, as I showed you over here on the main page, you can search by whether upcoming, pending, closed. So if you're looking to find out what happened with an application that already took place, you can look for it that way. We often are referring people to it because they'll say, hey, I saw that, you know, this thing changed on this building in the historic district just down the block from me. Is that okay? And we'll say, hey, well, here, take a look at the application on our website. You can see for yourself what was approved, and whether or not you think it looks like what was allowed. 99 times out of 100 it is, although every once in a while it's not, and then we take a different kind of action. It's a really useful resource in that sense. So now I'm going to jump around a little bit, take you to our YouTube page, which also actually goes back many, many years. What we have on here is everything from videos of almost every program we've done for the last several years. So a program like tonight, if you missed it and you wished you could have seen it, but weren't able to, you can watch it on our YouTube page. It's also on our website. If you saw it, but there's something about it you want to see again, or you want to check, or you want to share it with somebody, that's a great way of doing it as well. And in addition to that, we've got, lots of other kinds of stuff. We've got video tours. We have hearings from the Landmarks Preservation Commission. We have, our annual meetings and village awards, Kids Ed. We have a video series about small businesses located in historic districts and how they thrive. Videos of rallies, demonstrations, and press conferences, historic plaque unveiling. So lots of great stuff here that you should check out, and that we were one of the first groups like us in the city to do this, where long before we started to do virtual programming, we made it available virtually by recording even our in-person programming. So that's why, like I said, it goes back a good maybe 10 years now in terms of that. And then, speaking of first of its kind, is our children's education program, which has been running also since the mid-1990s. It was the first of its kind in the city, teaching children about historic preservation and the built environment, and how you can learn history by looking at what's around you, using Greenwich Village as kind of a living museum. And it's run through city schools, public and private. We do it throughout the 5 boroughs, regardless of need. Actually, 90% of the schools that we serve are high need schools. They get the program for free or at reduced cost. It's really based on ability to pay. Nobody's left out based on inability to pay. And since the COVID pandemic, we've also created a series of children's oriented learning videos. And so anybody can access these. They're now on our website, and it's a great way to keep your children or young friends engaged and have them learn a little bit about the history of our neighborhoods. And here's our pamphlet about the programs. We have a couple of different curricula. One of them is Greenwich Village Past and Present. Another one is Immigration in the South Village. So we use the neighborhood to teach the history of immigration. We're now developing one about African-American history. So the program is growing and expanding, even as we obviously face the challenge of not being able to implement it in the same in-person way that we had for so many years and how it was designed. So now, moving around, I want to talk about our plaque program, which I'm also very proud of. We've placed about 16 plaques on various buildings since we first began the program in 2012, I believe. And you can see our most recent one was Jane Jacobs, which was actually just a couple of weeks ago in the West Village, her home. You can see Alex Haley, Westbeth, Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman doctor in America, Lorraine Hansberry, Chaim Gross, the great sculptor and artist, Jean-Michel Basquiat, his studio in NoHo, James Baldwin, Martha Graham, Fillmore East. So you can see the photos and videos from virtually any of these. You can also go to our map and you'll see all of them listed here, and then you can just sort of click on one and you'll see some pictures, see the plaque, you'll see the building. You see some images from the actual unveiling. That was a particularly wonderful one, which unfortunately I had to miss, but I've watched the video, so I know how lovely it is, and some information about it and some links there. So, we're continuing to grow the historic plaque program, and as you can see from the map, it extends from east to west, north to south in our neighborhoods, and we really try to particularly honor the history of people who kind of push the envelope, innovators, people who went against the grain in one form or another, places that expanded the boundaries of the way we did things, the way we danced, the way music was performed. So we're very proud to be able to hopefully share that with the public and help to make sure that these histories get the due that they deserve. Now, speaking of places that we want to make sure get the due that they deserve, we have a Business of the Month program, which we've now been running for since also, I believe, about 2012. We've had over 70 businesses of the month, and it's a great way of helping to support and highlight some of the great businesses in our neighborhood. Some of them, unfortunately, have not always survived, but most of them have. I see Astor Place Hairstylist is at the top of the list. I know they recently announced that they were going to have to shut their doors, but many of them do continue to thrive, and hopefully we played a small part in making that possible by helping to highlight the business and to encourage people to patronize it by sharing through our social media channels and emails and newsletters, wonderful things that they do and just sort of what's unique about them. And we do a little bit of a write-up of each one of them. When we do, it goes into our e-newsletter. And we encourage people to support both these individual small independent businesses and basically all small independent businesses in our neighborhood, because now more than ever, they really do need our support, and we get nominations from the public for these. So if you have a favorite small business, there's a great way to do it. As I said, we get this in front of thousands of balls. So hopefully it helps, because a lot of folks are, in fact, struggling even before COVID came along. So now we're back to the 40th anniversary story map, which I definitely encourage you to check out. And I'm gonna just kind of briefly scroll through some of the highlights, starting in fact with the founding of the organization. As some of you may know, but a lot of you probably don't know, Village Preservation was originally founded as the Greenwich Village Trust for Historic Preservation in 1980. Of course, in 1984, we changed our name to the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation, and we've been that ever since, until about a year or so ago, when we decided that a more succinct name would serve us well, and now we go by Village Preservation. And some of the people who originally founded the organization were some of the earliest, most prominent preservationists in the neighborhood, including Ruth Wittenberg, the Ruth Wittenberg Triangle in the West Village is named after. And we were originally focused on the Greenwich Village Historic District, but as I mentioned before, and largely on buildings that were already landmarked, such as the district and these couple of other small historic districts that were located in the neighborhood, as well as some of these individual landmarks, almost all of which were designated in the late 1960s. But as time went on, the organization began to focus more on seeking to get more landmark designations for the neighborhood. And as early as the 1980s, we were sort of laying the groundwork for that. We'd also often help local institutions, historic institutions, when things like they suffered a fire, as St. Luke's did early on in Village Preservation's tenure. We worked with Congregation Sharif Israel to get the synagogue's cemetery on 11th Street restored 40 years ago. We've worked with them again more recently. We were among the many opponents of Westway, which was planned for the Greenwich Village waterfront. It wasn't until 1982 that we named our first executive director, Regina Kellerman, who had worked with the Landmarks Preservation Commission in the 1960s and had done some really important research on some of the earliest landmark designations in the city's history. We were originally located in the Salmagundi Club up here in the attic in one of these rooms. I'm not sure which of these windows it was. It might have actually been one that even faced the back. I've been in the room, but I didn't take note of which of the windows it was, but we were out of there long before I joined Village Preservation. But that was our first permanent home. One of the great things that Village Preservation did early on under Gina's leadership was we were very involved with the architectural dig at Sheridan Square. For those of you who don't know, what's now the viewing garden at Sheridan Square, not Christopher Park, the one just a little bit further south, Sheridan Square, was basically just asphalt. And there was a push to turn it into a garden, and we were very supportive of that, but we also wanted an architectural dig to take place there. And it did, in fact, unearth some incredible colonial and Native American artifacts. And you'll see here in the story map, there's a link. We actually, within our historic image archive, have a series of photos from that dig and some of the artifacts that they found. So the map is not just something to sort of scroll through, but it can bring you to more information if you are interested in it. This is, of course, the garden as it looks today, a lot nicer than the asphalt paving. And then it was 1984 when the trust became the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. And not long after that, we started doing some of the work that laid the groundwork for some of our preservation successes in later years, including looking to get the meatpacking district landmarked. That was a long-time goal of ours, happened in 2003. In the mid-1980s, we started doing a research project centered on Bleecker Street, all the way from Bowery to 7th Avenue, that also helped lay the foundation for a lot of these later landmark designations in the 2000s and 2010s, as well as battles that we're still fighting today. So of course, Bleecker Street goes through the NoHo Historic District, which was designated in 1999. In 2008, it was extended. We were a very, very strong proponent of that extension. We felt it was long overdue. We were the main proponent behind getting the South Village Historic District designated in 2013, which Bleecker Street went right through the heart of. As I mentioned, it was both Bleecker Street and Broadway. In 2017, we saved these two buildings, which we looked at before, 827, 831 Broadway, from demolition by getting them landmarked. They were planned for demolition. And of course, Broadway goes right through the area south of Union Square that we're seeking to get landmarked now. So as many of you probably remember, it was in the late 1980s when the Memphis downtown went up, which I think shocked a lot of people and showed that there was a whole new type of threat that was going on in terms of the far West Village and the level of development that it faced. And so we started to shift our efforts more towards the Greenwich Village waterfront and seeking to extend landmark protections towards that area. And we published a couple of books towards that end, which about 10 or 15 years later were the foundation for some of the landmark designations that we won in that neighborhood. Sometimes it takes a while. Here's some lovely pictures also from our historic image archive of what the waterfront looked like a little bit earlier than that in the 1970s. And of course, here it is today. Here is in 1990 and 91 when we first began our children's education program, which we were talking about before. In the a little over in the almost 3 decades that it's been running, it served over 10,000 students in more than 100 schools across the city. This is also when we began our annual Village Awards. One of our first recipients was the Jefferson Market Garden located here. There's a cute fundraiser we did in 1992, Hollywood on the Hudson. It wasn't until 1993 that we first formed our preservation committee, which was intended to look at and review every one of those landmarks applications that come before us, which we now share with the public, which is a very important part of what we do. So here's an example of one of these proposals for changes to a landmarked building. And we really, really closely scrutinize them. We have a committee that's made up of not just trustees of the organization, but community leaders and members of the public, as well as our staff. And it's a really important part of what we do. It was around that time that we first published our children's education workbook. Obviously, this is a sort of very different era. We're now basically trying to do this via online and in a video format. But back then, of course, printing a workbook was the way to try to reach as many children as possible and share this knowledge with them. And then, as I mentioned, in 1996, we began our oral history project. This is Fred Bass, who was the longtime owner of the Strand bookstore, who sat down with us. Photographers like Marlise Momber, musician David Amram, filmmaker Jonas Makis, Richard Meyer, Matt Umanov, Chino Garcia. These are all people who we've with whom we've done oral histories, and we're really proud to have them. And as I mentioned before, preserving federal houses is a big part of what we've focused on over the last 40 years. And a lot of that kicked off in 1997, which this grainy little photograph, which is a scan of an actual photograph, shows when we first got a grant from the Preserve New York program to try to research and document the hundreds of these houses that survived in Lower Manhattan, but didn't necessarily have landmark protections. And a lot of those houses we were able to eventually get landmarked. This set of pictures here shows all houses that we were federal houses that we were eventually able to get landmarked, and that's an important part of what we do. We also do a little bit of brick and mortar, so to speak, sort of stuff. This is the chain link cyclone fence that used to be around the Jefferson Market Garden, and we played a big part in getting it replaced with this sort of more historically appropriate wrought iron fence. Here's just some images of what the site looked like before that. And then in 1999, we moved into what is to this day our home, and was known as the Neighborhood Preservation Center when we moved in 1999, along with other preservation groups. It was the old rectory of St. Mark's Church, still belongs to and is affiliated with St. Mark's Church. In 1988, it had suffered a devastating fire, and the restoration, the long, slow restoration of the building and the turning it into this Neighborhood Preservation Center was a part of what kind of brought it back to life. And it is to this day still our home. And this year, in that same year, 1999, we scored one of our first really amazing historic victories in terms of preservation, when we were co-applicant for getting the Stonewall Inn and the surrounding area listed on the State and National Register of Historic Places. And in 1999, nothing like that had ever happened before. There was, of the tens of thousands of buildings on the National Register of Historic Places, not a single one of them was listed for a connection to LGBT history. And we were very proud to be part of making that happen. And then, interestingly, it took 16 years to get the city of New York to do the same thing, but that's a whole other story. And it was also in 1999 that we had our first benefit house tour, which is a wonderful tradition. This year we had to do a very modified version of it, or sort of a replacement of it. But it is our main fundraiser for the year. We're wonderful, generous people, allow us and a couple of hundred of our friends and supporters to see their homes under very controlled circumstances. We make sure we leave these homes in even better condition than they began the day. But it's a really wonderful opportunity to see what people do with these incredible historic spaces and how much they love them. And everything from these very, very careful, faithful restorations to really sort of interesting and dramatic contemporary twists on them. So it's a really, really wonderful opportunity to see the insides of homes that you would never otherwise get to see and what people have done with them. I'm going to wrap up shortly because we don't want to go too long and I want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. But when you get into the 2000s, and I encourage you to kind of explore this on your own, you start to see a lot of the work that we did over the years starting to bear fruit, whether it's what eventually became the Gansevoort Market Historic District, some of the work pushing back against NYU, which led to some really, really serious reforms in terms of the way the city regulates things like dorms and other university buildings and their construction. That's me when I joined in 2002, back when I was younger and a little better rested than I am these days. You'll see the long journey of getting the South Village landmarked from when we first got that grant, also from the Preservation League of New York State to help us do that. We began a partnership with the Grace Opportunity Project to expand our children's education program. By the way, I love this young guy's shirt here, always bored, but never bored. Very cute. Again, a little bit more details about our work to get federal houses landmarked, our campaign to get the Far West Village landmarked, which was always near and dear to our hearts, in part because it was the part of the neighborhood that Jane Jacobs had really pushed the city in the 1960s to include in the landmark designation, but did not happen. So we made it a big part of our ongoing effort to try to make that happen. We also, in 2005, got our first zoning protections enacted for the neighborhood to help ensure that we didn't have more of these all up and down the waterfront. We started to do some work looking specifically at the ethnic history of the neighborhood and immigrant history of the neighborhood around this time. Here's when we finally got the Far West Village extension of the Greenwich Village Historic District. So buildings like these, which previously had not been protected, now were. We also got the Weehawken Street Historic District designated in 2006. That was a big part of what we were looking to do. And in 2007 is when we first put forward our South Village Historic District proposal. And it wasn't until 2016 that the final stage of it was designated. And that was a big part of what we've worked on over the last couple of years. And I'll just quickly hit on this. This is, sort of another example of some of the work that we've done over the years, looking at the particular Italian immigrant history of the neighborhood. There's also some lovely pictures here. It's not all text, taken from the 19th through the 20th century, showing some of the shops, the schools, the stores, the businesses that Italian immigrants really built in our neighborhood. All right, I'm going to wrap up there. Everything else is here for you to explore, as well as for you to, kind of look into further. And I hope you will. There's 40 years of great stuff here. Hopefully there'll be 40 more. That's only possible if all of you continue to support the work that we do and participate in the work that we do. And Lord knows now it seems like there's more work than ever that we need to do, as the city seems to be shifting in a direction that's kind of particularly in some ways hostile to preservation. And I think in a lot of ways using the COVID pandemic to try to erase a lot of our the work, the protections that we've gotten for the neighborhood. So I am going to now just turn it over to Ariel to let me know if there's any questions or anything else that I can answer or share with everybody.
Thanks, Andrew. It's always just so amazing to get to review all of the work that Village Preservation has done and continues to do over the years. It's pretty impressive and extensive. Anyone who has questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. We did get one question earlier from Jeffrey, who was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the actual the boundaries of village preservation and what the village is, and especially as we're getting involved in some things in Soho, which I think it would also be great to touch on that work that's happening right now, just to sort of talk about the geography.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And if you ask a dozen different villagers what the boundaries of the neighborhood is, you'll get 24 different answers at least. But basically the way we describe it is we cover the neighborhoods of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. The East Village, I think it's pretty easy to describe the boundaries. It's, the East River, 14th Street, Houston Street. The western boundary, there may be some disagreement about, but I would say it's 4th Avenue and the Bowery. And then when you get west of that, it's Greenwich Village all the way over to the Hudson River. We consider the area south of Houston Street and west of West Broadway, particularly this area over here, the Sullivan Thompson Historic District, You're seeing my shared screen, right?
Yes.
And over here, the Charlton King Van Dam Historic District, also part of the village. So we consider that part of the neighborhood as well. The sort of traditional boundaries of Soho, which is really east of West Broadway, we don't consider part of our neighborhood, although of our catchment area in terms of the organization, although it's a wonderful neighborhood, and B, we certainly work closely with a lot of the community groups there. The reason why we've been so involved in the proposed rezoning is because it's for both Soho and NoHo. And we do very much cover NoHo, which I should say also, there's probably different opinions about exactly the boundaries, but the Bowery clearly is the eastern boundary, and Houston Street, given that the name is NoHo, north of Houston Street, is clearly the southern boundary. And I'd say most people would probably agree that Mercer Street is the western boundary, and then it goes up to about Astor Place. To be honest, even if NoHo wasn't involved in this, we would probably get involved because the implications of the proposed Soho NoHo rezoning are so broad and so impactful in terms of historic districts and landmarked areas throughout the city. We will get involved with issues beyond the bounds of our neighborhood when we feel that they have either broader citywide implications or implications for our neighborhood. And basically what the city is proposing to do in Soho and NoHo, which it's never done before, is to upzone the neighborhood, which means increase the allowable size of development through zoning by as much as 2.5 times what's currently allowed. And what's currently allowed is quite generous already. So 2.5 times, which they would do in some parts, and 2 times the size in other parts, is really, really, really a dramatic change and completely inappropriate. Even if the area wasn't landmarked, it would be inappropriate. But with that sort of additional layer, it is. And it's part of this push that's been going on by the real estate industry and an increasing number of voices in government for years, which is to say, historic neighborhoods aren't pulling their weight. They need to produce more housing for the city. And they need to produce more affordable housing, to which we've responded, we would be more than happy to see new development in our neighborhood be affordable housing, and even at considerably higher levels than the city is proposing. But you don't need to double or triple the allowable size of development in order to make that happen. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we believe that this push is really about just a huge windfall that developers have been lobbying for years. And it's not about the issue of affordability, and it's not about equity or any of the other stuff, because we're offering them ways of doing that and achieving that don't involve destroying the neighborhood, and they're not interested in that. So it's really seemingly the upzoning. And unfortunately, if they're successful with Soho and NoHo, and they've made no bones about this, this is not my prediction, this is not my reading of the tea leaves, they've made very clear that after Soho and NoHo, they want to apply this exact same approach to other historic neighborhoods, especially centrally located neighborhoods like Greenwich Village and the East Village and a lot of other ones. So that's a long answer to your question, but hopefully it clarifies both what our boundaries are and when and why we sometimes get involved with things that might be a little bit outside of them.
Thanks. That's very helpful. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions from Arlene. Thanks, Arlene, for all of these. She has a couple of questions about very specific things. One is the Village Independent Democrat building. Do you know about this and if it's been landmarked?
Well, I know Village Independent Democrats. I'm not sure I know the Village Independent Democrat building.
Okay.
I know that they have sort of an office on Perry Street, and they often have their meetings in a church on Christopher Street. If you're referring to either of those both are within the Greenwich Village Historic District, which means they're part of a landmark designation.
Great. And she also wants to know where we keep all of our historical papers.
Ah, interesting. So some of them are stored off-site, although very carefully stored. Some of them are in the the St. Mark's Rectory, where our offices are, and the Neighborhood Preservation Center. So, we try to just make sure that whatever we hold on to, if it's something that we need to access regularly, it's easily accessible. Less regularly, it might be offsite, but that whatever we do, we store it in such a way that it doesn't deteriorate over time, because some of it is our own records, which, now after 40 years, a 40-year-old piece of paper can easily fall apart. But also a lot of people have donated their records to us. So sometimes it's things that go back a lot further. And we try to take very good care of that. We have limited capacity. We're not an archive per se. So sometimes when people want to donate those things to us, we say, let's introduce you to the New York Public Library or some other entity that's in a better position to be able to take care of these things over the long term. But there are some that we definitely do, and that we hold on to either on-site or off-site, but in appropriate conditions.
Thanks. Yeah. Yes, our offices are certainly cozy at least when we're all there and it's not a pandemic. Barbara wants to know about the status of the 13th Street Theater building now that the co-owners died at 100+ years. We've talked about this in the office.
Yeah. So, we've been keeping an eye on this for a while, and we knew that when I think Barbara is her name, when she died, the woman who ran the theater, that would put the future of the theater and the building in jeopardy. So we have submitted information to the Landmarks Preservation Commission about the history and the significance of the building, and we have urged them to consider it for landmark designation, because we are very worried that with the agreement between her and the other owners now gone, which was the term of it was until she was no longer with us, that the building's future would be in doubt, and we would very much hate to see it be lost. So we've already reached out to the Landmarks Preservation Commission to try to make a strong case for not letting that happen.
That's good. Such a beautiful building.
Yeah.
So I think this will be our last question. It's from, oh wait. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yes. Yes, Arlene, I saw your question. I don't think we have an oral history with Ed Fancher. Do you know who that is?
Yes, I believe
we do.
I think
amazing.
Yeah, Ed Fancher from the Village Voice. I believe he is one of our oral histories, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, great. Well, Arlene, there you go. Check out our oral history page. Okay, so yes, I'm gonna ask Jean's question as our last question, which I think it's a great one. Andrew, this is for you personally.
Okay.
What is your proudest moment in your 19 years at Village Preservation, and what is your fondest dream for a successful get in the years ahead?
Oh, wow, boy. I would say my proudest moment, it's not so much a moment, but it's the South Village, because that's something that I came into when I interviewed for the position as executive director. They asked me, what would you like to see happen? What would you like to work on? If you had your druthers. And I talked about the South Village, which had long been a favorite part of New York, of mine, the area sort of south of Washington Square, that had this sort of more kind of offbeat and immigrant connected as well as countercultural history. And that was clearly getting ravaged by NYU. And I was thrilled to hear that the board was equally enthusiastic about and interested in seeing that happen. So it was something that I started working on almost from my first day in 2002. It only took 14 years, but we did eventually get, in 3 parts, virtually the entire neighborhood landmarked, something like 700 buildings in 3 different historic districts and several different individual landmarks. And because it brought in all of these strains of history and architecture that traditionally hadn't been recognized, whether it was the immigrant history, the countercultural history, the LGBTQ history, the African-American history, all of those really made me particularly proud of that. So I would say It's sort of a 14-year moment, but it's a moment that I'm very proud of. And then sort of my fondest wish. Well, we're very much looking to see the area south of Union Square landmarked, because it really also has this wonderful, rich history and architecture history, a lot of it connected to activism and great writers and great artists. More than anything, I'd like to see the sort of tide turn in terms of a renewed kind of respect for and understanding of why preservation is so important, and how it's not only compatible with, but actually can be in a lot of ways very supportive of equity and affordability and all those other things, which are the people who push back on it. It's funny, they used to say preservation was going to economically strangle the city, and that everybody would leave because of things that were landmarked and there'd be no investment. Now they say it's too successful. It makes the city too desirable, too pricey. If they can't get us from one side, they're going to try to get us from the other. And if I had one overarching wish, it would just be that there would be a true understanding and appreciation of the value of preservation and all that it does to contribute to making New York successful. Not just in the moment, but over time. The things that people come to New York for are typically not the things that were built yesterday, but they're the things that are sort of these really deeply embedded parts of the city's history and character. And that's the stuff that we fight to preserve and protect.
Thank you so much. Yes. Yes. Amen. Thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks to everyone who's here with us.
Well, Ariel, thank you for putting this together and for all the work you do with all of the amazing programs, including the 3 this week. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who participated tonight and who's supported or been involved with village preservation in one form or another over the 40 years. Everything that I was able to sort of quickly give you a taste of, and then, the 100 times more that I wasn't even able to get to, that's all because of you and your support and your participation. So thank you, and stay with us, because we need you more than ever, and we have more really important work to do now than ever before.
That's right. Thanks so much. And take good care, everyone. We will be back here again tomorrow night, celebrating Judson Memorial Church, and keep an eye on our programs to come, and many links that will come to you in our follow-up email after tonight's event. So thanks so much, everyone. Take good care. Have a good night.